Up next, we have Lucas Meachem, a North Carolina born, world renowned, and Grammy winning lyric baritone, referred to as the rock star of opera. He has performed at all the major opera houses in the United States and all over the world, including right here at the Metropolitan Opera. He made his debut in 2007 as General Rayevsky in War and Peace, Teatro alla Scala, the Royal Opera House, Opera Nacional de Paris, the Rabbinian Festival, Bayerische Staatsoper, and Teatro Real de Madrid, just to name a few. In addition to a demanding performing career, in 2020, he and his wife, collaborative pianist Rae De Vine, founded Perfect Day Music Foundation, an organization focused on championing inclusivity and diversity in classical music by uplifting the work of composers and poets from underrepresented backgrounds. In 2021, he released his first solo album, Shall We Gather, featuring American art songs, and performed with his wife, Rae De Vine. This is only scratching the surface of his very impressive bio, and you will have the pleasure of seeing him as Sharpless in Madama Butterfly. We're so excited to have him with us today. Lucas, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. What an introduction. My God. I'm
blushing.
You
It's always a challenge to try to make it concise, but I always appreciate that, it's scratching the surface. You do a lot of things. It's just kind of amazing. I'm curious, how do you balance that? Like performing, travel, the organization, collaborating with your wife, how do you not lose track of everything?
It's funny, as you're reading all that, it reminds me of being a young singer just grasping at straws, trying to figure out what could people possibly say about me. So it's nice to be at a place that there are a few things you could say that are positive. So that's as far as keeping it together, it's all about, preparation is key. If you prepare long enough in advance, you're able to do it. For instance, I'm singing 6 new roles this season, and I'm currently singing my 5th right now. I'm in Chicago at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra singing Elijah tonight. Actually, it's my 3rd in 3 nights. And my 6th one is coming in Hanover after the Met, the Butterfly at the Met. But it's all about having a schedule and keeping to that schedule. It's like with anything. If you're a chef, if you're a doctor, if you have a tight schedule and if you have a program and if you prepare, you're going to be able to get it all done. But it does take the further I go in this career, the more balanced I have to be.
Yeah, I've noticed also, you have a really wonderfully joyful and playful online presence. And I know you've shared a little bit, for those who are not currently following you on Instagram, you've shared a little bit about how you take care of yourself. What does self-care look like? And I'm hoping that you could share a little bit of what that is for you. So some of our educators and our students who will be able to see this later can learn from you.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you, Aram, for your kind comment over there. He says, my YouTube is delightful. And I all of it just takes so much work. But I think balance comes first from knowing yourself. And that's one of the hardest things to do. Again, no matter what you do, it starts inside you, and only you know what that voice inside is telling you need. And it's up to you to listen to that voice. And so in a way, that's both scary and empowering. That the keys to your fulfilledness lie within yourself. And I was going to say the key to happiness, but I don't think happiness is the goal. I think it's the goal is to be fulfilled as a person, to live up to your current moral and intellectual abilities. And to sort of, if one is doing that, then they're being very honest with oneself. And so it really requires that. That's sort of a jumping off point for saying you got to keep a good schedule, you have to practice hard, and you have to work hard. Those are sort of givens, but the deeper underlying thing is really, it all lies within you. The both success and failure, it lies within you, and both of them are okay because both of them lead to growth.
If we could just put that in a plaque and share that with our young people every day, just that fear of failure and embracing that as a learning and growth opportunity, That's just gold. So thank you for saying that. I'm sure I'm not the one who appreciates it. I'm curious to know, in such a demanding career, that being a singer is different than being another type of musician. You're always carrying it with you. You can't really put it away and walk away from it. What inspired you to even embark on this crazy life as an opera singer? Why opera? Why be a singer? What inspired that?
Well, it's kind of always been the course for me. I have to say, I've never thought of doing anything else. I've never considered doing anything else. And there are a lot of people out there like that just have it sort of inside themselves. And I think you have to have that. Honestly, like people ask, I have a 4.5-year-old son, and people say, "Oh, with a pianist wife and a singer father, he's going to be a musician." I'm like, please no, please no. It's so freaking hard. It is just, I wouldn't wish it upon someone unless you have to do it. And if you have to do it, then you'll do it. And that's kind of where I come from with it, is that I always felt this calling that I had. Not that calling is too big of a word. It was more of an affliction. Really, it was something that I couldn't live without. I needed to be in front of people. I needed to be making music with my voice. And again, my wife and I were just talking about this earlier today. Is like, and last night, is finding one's own voice is probably the most difficult path, because you have to learn for so many years as a student to mimic, to say, oh, well, tradition tells me this, history tells me this, my voice teacher tells me this, my coaches tell me this. I will mimic what they say and try to recreate it in the best way possible. And eventually there comes a shift where you've learned the history, you've learned the traditions, you've learned how to do things vocally, the diction rules, and all of a sudden you're given so much creative control that then you are the artist. And you, as the artist rather than the learner or the student, that's a really beautiful place to sort of be. And oftentimes we don't recognize it when we're in that moment. And so to be able to look back, I can tell when those moments happen for me, either with, say, something as specific as French diction. I could tell you where I turned the corner on French diction and made it my own. And again, it goes back to knowing oneself and being aware, do I need to work harder on this, or am I at a place where I feel I've mastered it enough to tell my own stories through the French language? And it's so funny. There's a scientist that talks about knowledge, and he says it's like filling a pie sheet with several pieces of pie until you have a whole pie and you think, I have knowledge. And then you look down the table and there are 1,000 unfilled pie sheets you have to fill. That's what opera and music is for me. It's like, yay, I got it. And then I look down the table, I'm like, oh God, I have so much more work to do. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a lot there. I had to do it, so I did it.
Yes, I love that. I just in sharing your love of opera, I'm curious to know, and I'm also thinking of some of our students too, right? Have you ever, or how have you ever navigated doubt or fear? Yes, you're motivated. Yes, you knew that this was the path for you, but have you ever experienced moments of self-doubt, and how did you deal with that? How did you overcome that?
Well, a little bit about me. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. Like literally, there was this little bitty road, and where that road ended, a dirt road began. And at the end of that dirt road was my house. The closest friend I had was my best friend, because he was the only friend I could reach with a bicycle, and he was 3 houses away at 2 miles away. And so, I grew up in the middle of a bunch of forest land. So, I had a lot of time to myself to just kind of, putt around and, be a kid in the woods. And so I never knew opera. I never knew classical music. I would listen to the radio and be able to basically mimic anyone I heard on the radio, and thought, wow, even in my falsetto, I could sing like Whitney Houston back then, back in my like younger, like 15, 16 years old. And then my mom gave me a 3 tenor tape, and I couldn't touch these guys. I was like, what is this? I don't even know what it is, and as soon as I heard that, it's not that I was caught by opera. It's not that it captured me in the moment. I just didn't understand it, and I thought, I want to explore this. And so I don't know. I've kind of gotten off of what your question was. What was your question again?
Just,
Sorry.
it's fine. I love a tangent, as my coworkers would tell you.
I live in a tangent.
Yeah, that's my like default setting. But in pursuing this career, have you ever experienced self-doubt?
Self-doubt, yes.
And how did you overcome that?
And now, thank you for connecting those dots with me. The reason I tell you that is to say I had I want to say a healthy ignorance of what opera was for many, many years. If people started talking about Corelli and Fritz Wunderlich, I thought those might be high-end, appliances you'd put in your house. And so I didn't know anything about anything. I try and steer the conversations towards sports because I knew about sports. And so I guess I didn't know to doubt. I didn't know any better to doubt. I always thought, oh, I'm good and you're good and let's all be good together and we'll do the best we can. Go team opera, you know?
Yes.
It's kind of how I went through with, yeah, like I say, a healthy ignorance about what it was, about the career. I just didn't know any better. And you know what? That has both helped me tremendously and hurt me tremendously. And so no one knows what it's like until in any field until you do it and succeed or do it and fail. And I have to say I've had way more failures than I have successes. It's just the successes are more public than the failures. And so people see the successes and say, oh, he's successful. And no, I mean, if you had to count the amount of successes versus failures, the failures outweigh them every time. And that's art, that's learning, that's growth. And so I ignorantly have gone through this with an amount of enthusiasm for myself that probably shouldn't have been there, but because I didn't know any better, I had it. And so I've never been one to get nervous. I get nervous if I sing, I'll sing at the Met or I'll sing anywhere. And I'm just like, yeah, let's do this. We're going to be great. And this is going to be awesome. And then I'll go home and I'll be at my mom's church and I'll sing for 12 people. It's a very small congregation. And every one of them I grew up with. And I'm looking at my hand. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with me? And so I don't know. I don't know. And because people ask me this question, how do you deal with this? And I just don't really have it around me. I can say that another reason that I do feel confident about my abilities is because I prepare rigorously. I show up and if I'm not the best, if I'm not the best learning one on my score, if I don't know it better than everyone else, I have failed the first day of rehearsal. And so I have a big fear of being fired and failing. That is a fear I have. So if anything, I have nightmares about it, about showing up and having missed a part that I'm supposed to learn, or showing up and they say we're not doing Pearl Fishers, we're now doing Rigoletto. And so those are my nightmares. And I'd say so through a healthy amount of ignorance and fear, I prepare a lot and also don't really get that nervous about things.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Someone commented in the chat that they just love how real you are. And I have to echo that sentiment. And speaking, and especially that now we have a better idea of what a stress work dream is perhaps for a singer. You prepare the wrong opera. Oh, God forbid.
That's it.
And I love also what you said about, just the nervousness that comes with performing for a more intimate crowd of people who have known you your whole life. And when I hear that, what comes to mind is the word vulnerability, and how sometimes even that can bring more nerves out of us than performing in front of thousands of people that maybe we don't know, or we don't really know exactly who's in the audience. And I think
those are my favorite shows. Those are my favorite. If I have say one specific person in the house, I'll be a little nervy for the show, like just one out of the 3,000. And I'm like, oh God, whoever's there, it's like my grandma's there. And I'm like, ugh. So yeah, it's true though.
It sounds like you're getting nervous though for the right people, because I think that also comes from a place of deep care, of wanting to reach people or even have them be proud of you, if I might, make that assumption too.
No, I think that's a fair assumption. I haven't gone down the line that much. By the way, excuse me, I've spent months learning the role of Elijah. I've worked so hard on it and I felt great and I'm singing it and rehearsing it. And literally the day before we open on Thursday, I got sick. So excuse me, I have to blow my nose. I'm going to mute myself. Please continue.
Go for it. Yes. It's all, you know what? This is the space. You need to do what you need to be well in this space. So if it's blowing your nose, it's fine. I'm going to hydrate. Here we go. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, we're ready. Speaking of preparing for a role, you just said your 6 new roles this coming up soon. Like that's kind of bananas to even just wrap my head around. One thing I saw, because obviously I did a deep dive and I was on your Instagram and I was just like loving all of your content. And there was a video where you're preparing and you're going through the score with your wife, who's a collaborative pianist, and you were trying to be off book and sing your part, and she was kind of air playing the piano while also singing the other voice part while trying to cue you. What is it like to live with another musician, and what that collaboration is like with between the two of you?
Well, first of all, she is my secret weapon in this career. It's incredible to have somebody. I mean, literally, she brings my overall productivity. If I was like a factory line, she brings my productivity up like 12 to 15% every show I do, because she comes to my rehearsal, she comes to my final dresses on stage and says, "Hey, that note was a little pushed. That note was a little flat. When you bend over to pick up that letter, don't show your butt to the audience." You know, like everything. She notices everything. She's incredibly experienced. So it's are there no downsides? I can't think of a downside to having a collaborative pianist as a wife. I mean, and also the type of person she is. I mean, I could obviously go on all day about my wife, but I don't want to bore all of you. It's a pretty wonderful relationship, and with all these new roles, it's nice to not have to pay somebody to teach me. Well, I mean, I guess I do pay in other ways, but she's pretty wonderful.
Speaking about that, wonderful work dynamic that you have, on your first solo album, Shall We Gather, it's the two of you for that album. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about what that process was like. Not just working on the couch and having her tell you, like, please don't like show your butt to the audience, dear, but creating a professional.
Don't
Yes.
show your butt to the audience, dear.
Yes, exactly. But creating this professional product that's going to be shared so widely. Was that collaboration any different? And what was it like for you two?
Well, any collaboration I have with her, like we do recitals together. We've got one coming up at the Kennedy Center, and it's different than two musicians coming together who are friends or colleagues and doing something and making music together. It's like they're able. Don't get me wrong. I've seen some amazing recitals where it's like they're in each side of each other's brains, but she and I are in each side of each other's hearts as well. And so when I perform with Irina, it's unlike any other collaborative experience I've ever had, because not only do we discuss our ideas with our marriage conversation types, we discuss them with our musical conversation abilities as well. And so when we merge those together, it becomes this thing that's greater than the sum of its parts somehow. And so that was exactly the experience with this recording. Though I have to say, recording an album, it's one of those things where I said, I'm never doing this again. It's just a pain in the butt. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. All right, this is an interview, Lucas. I would say it was a difficult journey, and I'm happy with where we've arrived. I'm happy it's over, basically. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please, I'm done.
What was something that was maybe a surprising challenge in that process that you didn't?
COVID.
Oh, that
like
part.
Literally.
Oh, this little thing. Yeah. Yes.
December of 2019. We're like, yeah, let's do an album. This is going to be great. We recorded it in January. Literally it was like April 5th or something. It was totally done, and we're pitching it to labels, and they're like, we're not touching anything right now because we don't know if the world is going to end. It's like we were all there, we know what happened. So like it was a very tough time on top of the process. I mean, don't get me wrong, the process was fantastic. Learning the music, working on the music, it was all sort of the tail end of it. In addition to COVID, I shouldn't speak poorly about making an album. It was really cool, and I'm very privileged to be able to have made it, obviously. But it was also a tremendous amount of work. And I mean, yeah, because it's at the end of the day, the buck stops with both me and her. It's our names on the recital, So having that, singing Sharpless and Madama Butterfly, I'm a cog in a wheel in a way. I'm a relatively important cog, I like to think, but still, there's other people that can carry weight if I'm sick or if I miss a note or if I miss an entrance or something. With us in this recording, the buck stops here. And I take that responsibility very seriously with anything I put out there. Anything that's my product, I take very seriously. So that's I feel like I've explained it a little better about why it's difficult. It's also my impossibly high standards.
Yeah, you actually answered another question I had about, the comparing kind of that process and experience of being in an opera versus recording a studio album. So you actually got ahead of me on that, which I'm grateful for. I think that's wonderful. Another thing that I'm curious about, specifically speaking to opera and thinking about Madama Butterfly in particular, if I may shift just a little bit, you know, the the music is beautiful. Today, we've been talking a bit about adaptation and how the story is an adaptation. There's many versions of it, whether it's the musical theater, where it's the book that it was based off of, and stories and hearsay. But then also, there are some tough themes in it. There's the suicide is an element of this opera. In people being disloyal, and I'm curious just to hear from your perspective, how do you think opera can help us have difficult conversations, or how can opera help us have conversations about things that might be hard for us to face or kind of wrap our heads around?
Well, that's a good question, but I think the bigger one is what makes opera special. And you will answer that question by answering that question. And so for me, what makes opera special is it is, first of all, you need a composer like Puccini. You
It
can't just
helps.
have me write down my own Madame Butterfly and say, yeah, this is good. But Puccini helps a lot. But what for me makes opera special is the fact that it tells real human stories that you could play Madame Butterfly for anyone, and they would feel the same emotions that we feel in the United States, that someone would feel in Turkmenistan, that somebody would feel in London, that someone would feel in Namibia, and so we have, it's something that connects us as a species, that we could understand being wronged, or for instance, having to give the first night of your marriage to a count, or being seduced by a don, or so many things in opera that we could sort of look at and say, I would not want that to happen to me. And it sort of speaks to the human condition, and I think that's what opera does very well when it's done well. And so to say that is to say that there are things that have happened in our human experience that we consider sort of moral norms and intellectual norms. And when you go against the grain of that, if you're going to take advantage of a woman because of her social status or her standing or her financial status and say, I'm going to use that and then leave her, I think a lot of people would say that's probably not accepted in almost any society. And so it's an important story to tell because it's a true story about things that have happened in our history. And we can't close our eyes to the things that have happened in history. We have to accept them so as not to repeat them. That's how we become better as a species. That's how we move forward. It's funny, my lunch just before this with a friend of mine, we were really heady in what we were talking about. It really led it well into this conversation. It was very intellectual. So anyway, this is my personal take on it, is that we have to look at these things head on rather than pretend they don't exist or have never existed. And in doing so, we can solve things in our hearts, in our minds, and hopefully for the future.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We talk a lot about, also to be a little nerdy for a second, like even within our school settings and our school partners, like the cross-curricular connections of opera. Yes, it's multidisciplinary. It has music and dance and theater and design and visual art, but also it speaks to so many different subjects. It speaks to the humanities, it speaks to history, it speaks to geography. So you really brought that together in a wonderful way that really touches on some of the conversations that we've had with our partners and in other PDs that we've had.
Thank you, Ray.
So yeah, of course. No, and this is why I always love these. I always draft some questions ahead of time, but the conversation usually unfolds in a really beautiful way and it goes where it needs to go. So another question that I have, and well, going back to our teachers, and I've asked this before, and I might just always ask this going forward. When it came to when it comes to your training and in studying this art form, has there been any particular teacher that stood out to you or had a significant impact on your life or your outlook or just whatever that is. And who were they, and what was it about them that struck you so?
That's a great question. I have friends that have had one voice teacher since they were 15 years old, and then that's not the course that I took. So I'd say most of my teachers that taught me something I really needed to learn, uh, they were able to not just know that I needed knowledge, but to know when I was able to take in that knowledge and then give it to me when I was ready for it. Because I've heard the same things from different teachers in different ways, but I wasn't ready for that information yet. And so my favorite teachers are the ones that gave me that information when I was ready for it because of where I was developmentally. And I mean, to name a few, if I'm just naming people, Dr. Joseph Amaya was my first voice teacher in college. Oh my God, John Malloy. I'll tell you a quick story about him. He was well, I will tell you about him. But I just so you know, I went to school at 3 different universities for 8 years, and I never graduated from any of them. So it's very hard to do, actually. It's a skill, a special skill, I like to think. And so John Malloy was my second voice teacher at my second university I didn't graduate from, Eastman. And I was singing some German art song, and I just listened to like Fischer Dieskau and Bryn Terfel, and I was listening to all these recordings of it, and I finished singing it, and he said, I was 23 years old, he said, Lucas, that was perfect. Finally shot back at him and said, that's not perfect. I don't sound like Bryn Terfel. Those guys are perfect. They have great, look, I sound like a pipsqueak. I'm a 23-year-old lyric baritone. I sound like a tenor, basically. And not that that's a bad thing. I just had a lighter sound. And he said, Lucas, you're a perfect 23-year-old lyric baritone. And that resonated with me so much that you were like, perfection is not just doing perfectly. It's doing the best with what you have in the moment. And that taught me so much that there are going to become moments where I'm prepared to take in information, and when I'm ready for that is when it's time to learn it and to apply it. And so just to give another shout out to Marlena Mollis, who is my she was my everything for a long time, and she taught me a tremendous amount.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so it's empowering to hear like the importance of timing and receiving information and critique when you are receptive to it. And that also, I think, speaks to the skill of these teachers that often become mentors to us, right? Of being able to be in tune enough with the student to recognize, okay, now's the time to share this, or this is the way I need to share it so it is received. So, flipping the script a little bit, now you've been in positions also as a teacher yourself and coaching other young singers. And, when you're working with other singers as more of the coach or the teacher, right? What is it that you really hope to have them walk away from? If they were going to walk away with like one thing, no pressure, but pressure, right?
Well,
if they had to walk away with one thing, what was it? What are you going for?
I have to say, as good as my teachers were about choosing the moment, I am bad at it. I throw so much at people, and I'm like, good luck, So no, I try and be specific, and I'm getting better at focusing in on one thing. But if I had one thing that I am hearing these days that young singers are doing that works against their better abilities, I guess you could say, it's what I call rehearsal room singing. And I think COVID enhanced this. It's when, I mean, if we're going to get technical, it's when they listen to their own sound within their own skull. They basically sing and listen from their lips to their ears, judge that sound and say, this is going well, rather than trusting, which requires a lot more humility and sort of, it's scary to trust the sound that goes out, hits the wall opposite you, and listening to the reverb, that what comes back to you is what the sound you are making. If you're not getting that, you're not putting out the right type of sound. So it's really, I hear a lot of people singing this sort of woollier, more cupo covered sound from young singers. And as soon as I just say, you know what, say ah, and they'll be like, oh, I'm like, no, don't sing ah, say ah. And they'll be like, oh, like, no. And then they'll finally go, ah. And I'm like, thank you. That is the placement. That is, of course, some people think placement is a bad word these days. I don't, and I know I'm talking to a bunch of educators here. So I put placement. So that's what I'm hearing a lot these days, and that's what I work towards trying to solve. It's making sure the voice gets out. I want to hear you in the back row, you know? And the first question I always ask in a master class is, what's the most important thing for an opera singer to achieve? And for me, the answer to that question, and I get great answers, and I say, that's a great answer, and that's very important. That's a great answer, very important, you know? Timing, diction, story, for sure. But if they can't hear you, to be heard at all times, for me, is the great goal of opera. Because if they can't hear you, it doesn't matter if you went to Lucca and studied Italian, you speak the most perfect Italian diction in the world, you spent 20 years learning how to do so. If they can't hear that perfect Italian diction, it doesn't matter. If you know what Mozart ate for breakfast the morning he wrote the overture to Don Giovanni, it doesn't matter if they can't hear you. So that's what I'm working on.
I love that. I love it so much. The time has kind of gone like quicker than I anticipated because
and I'm also singing in Madama Butterfly.
And I would like to kind of ask a final question. Well, I guess it's a two-parter. You've talked a little bit about some challenges or how you've even been like blissfully ignorant of moments where maybe you should have been more like self-conscious, as it were. But it's two parts. So what has been something that has been like surprisingly difficult about this career? And then I want to end, the teacher in me wants to end on the grow, like on the joyful moment. But like, and what is something that has been surprisingly joyful in this career of yours? So something surprisingly difficult, and then on the flip side, it's maybe something that's surprisingly joyful.
Okay. Growing up in like you know my backstory. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in the South. I was very Southern growing up, and what I mean is I was overly kind. And I always thought that just be yourself and people will like you. And that's just not true. It took me some hard knocks of learning that being an opera singer, people want you to be you to a point. And they then want you either to conform or to be their idea of what an opera singer is. And I'm still, and I guess I sort of have it figured out. So basically, I keep myself to myself when I'm in the rehearsal process. And I have friends, don't get me wrong. And it's actually the only time I get in trouble is when I work with my dearest friends, because I'm just like, blah, and we're just all over the place. But but I try and keep it classy at all times. And it was a learning curve for me, realizing that people might look at me and think he's fake, or he's just putting this on, or he's actually doing this for some malicious reason, when I just was a really nice guy who didn't know any better. And so that was a learning process, to learn that in opera, you're expected to be a certain way in certain places. And I've learned that lesson well. And I now am just a nice, classy guy. And I like to think so anyway. And the flip side to that is what exactly what was the question? What's the joyous thing about opera?
What has been something that's been surprisingly joyful as our final question for the afternoon?
Opera's shown me the world. I didn't leave the United States until I was 26 years old, and I've only ever left the United States to perform opera. So I didn't travel much. Again, I didn't grow up. We didn't go on many trips. If we did, we drove. And so now, you know, I'm a mega status person with Delta, and like, you know, I travel a lot, and so opera has shown me the world, and I have nothing to thank. I have nothing but thanks for that. And now I'm seeing my son see the world because of opera. And that is the biggest eye opener. That, I mean, he's been to the Natural History Museums of Paris and London and Madrid and Vienna, and he's like meeting all these kids who speak all these languages, and he's so cute. And it's just so incredible seeing him experience this life that I didn't know anything outside of my county, even my state, barely, you know, like growing up. And to see him he's been to 12 countries. He's 4.5 years old, you know, I just re-upped his passport, you know. It's like, I don't know. I get a little verklempt thinking about that. I just want him to have the best, and that opera is giving that to my family now is just about the most amazing thing ever.